Section 2.5, ratios, percents, multiplying and dividing real numbers. Ratio. A ratio is a fraction of 2 units. For example, I might say there are 10 girls and 8 boys in a class. What is the ratio of boys to girls? Well, you start with the number of boys, there's 8. You divide by the number of girls, there's 10. So the answer would be 8 over 10, which we would probably reduce. We reduce our fractions here. We would write it as 4 or 5. I might ask you, what is the ratio of girls to total number of students? And you would start with the number of girls. There are 10 girls. Divided by the total number of students. Well, there's 10 girls and 8 boys, so I guess there's 18 total. And you would reduce again by 2. You would write 5/9. Now, an important kind of ratio that you see quite often is called the unit ratio. The unit ratio means the denominator is 1. And so very often when you have a unit ratio, you're going to write things in terms of decimals. For example, what is the unit ratio of boys to girls? What is the unit ratio of boys to girls? Well, once again, our ratio was 8/10, which would be 4/5. Now, how do you get 1 on bottom? Well, you take your calculator and you go 4 divided by 5, and you should get 0.8. So our unit ratio, we would write it as a decimal, 0.8. Not all unit ratios will be decimals, but most of them will. You'll find you'll get a decimal. Let's do one more. Sometimes your decimal will turn out to be bigger than 1 also. For example, I might ask, what is the unit ratio of girls to boys? This time I would have 18 over 10. No, I wouldn't. Not 18 over 10, I would have 10 over 8. Right? Because there are 10 girls, 8 boys. I could grab my calculator, just type in 10 over 8, and I get 1.25. So once again, we do get a decimal. But we get a decimal bigger than 1. That's okay. All right, percents. Percents are really ratios. These are ratios with 100 on bottom. Always 100. That's why it's called percent. Per is part, and cent stands for 100%. Part of 100. Okay? So percents can be written 3 different ways, really. They can be written as fractions, they can be written as decimals, and they can be written using the percent symbol. So I'm going to just kind of build a table here. Fraction, decimal, percent symbol. For example, I might give you 25 over 100. That's written as a fraction. Of course, 25 over 100 could be reduced. You could write it as 1/4 also. But the reason I wrote it as 25 over 100 was because I wanted to show you how the fraction, the decimal, and the percent symbol all relate. If you have it written as 25 over 100, 25 over 100 is 0.25. So you see where the 25 and the 0.25 are related. And then to write as a percent symbol, if you have the decimal value, you move the decimal 2 places to the right, and then you put a percent symbol on the end. So 25% would be the same as saying 25 over 100. Again, percent stands for per 100. All right, let's try another one. Let's say I give you the decimal first, 0.83. Okay, that's a pretty easy one to write as a fraction. That's 83 over 100. And pretty easy to write as a decimal. That's 83%. All right, what if I give you one that's not so easy to write as a fraction? Well, how could that be? Well, it might be easy to write as a fraction, but not so easy to write it as with 100 on bottom. But that's not always required. Let's say I gave you 12.125. Well, 12.125 is really 12 and 125 over 1,000. And that's an okay way to write it, I suppose. Nothing wrong with writing a fraction that way, as a mixed number. How about as a decimal? No, we already have it as a decimal. How about as a percent? As a percent, we would have to move the decimal place 2 places to the right, 12.12.5%. So that would be 1,212.5%. Now, what if I give you a fraction where I don't give you 100 on bottom? What if I give you 3/5? Well, pretty easy. What you're going to do is you're going to grab your calculator. You're going to type in 3/5. You're going to find out that the decimal is 0.6. So the percent is 60%. All right, about the last thing I could do, I guess, is I could give you the percent symbol and ask you to give me the decimal and the fraction. How about I gave you 8.2%? Well, if I had the decimal and I wanted to go to the percent symbol, I moved the decimal place to the right. Seems as though if I have the percent sign and I want to go back to the decimal, I move the decimal place to the left, and that's exactly right. So this would be 0.082%. I moved the decimal place 2 spots to the left, and that would be 82 over 1,000, because we have 3 decimal places. How about last one of these? How about 0.004%? Now you got to be careful here. A lot of people would write this as a decimal. Oh, I see I made a mistake up here. I shouldn't have that percent symbol there. A lot of people would write this as a decimal as 0.4 because they moved the decimal place. Well, you move the decimal place the wrong direction. Remember, if I give you a decimal, if I give you a percent and you want to go to a decimal, you got to move the decimal place to the left. So this should actually be 0.00004. And then as a fraction, that would be 4 divided by, I've got to figure out what place we're in here. Tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s. Is that right? Tens, hundreds, thousands. Oh, yeah, 100,000. So we'd write it like so. Okay, the other thing you're going to see with percents in this section is you're going to see problems like, what is 30% of 600? These shouldn't be hard. A lot of people have this fraction that they use, percent over base equals, I can't even remember how that goes actually. I just translate letter for letter, word for word. What? This is what I'm looking for. So I'll call that X, I suppose. Is equals 30%. I write that as a decimal, 0.30. Of is a word we use for multiply. So let's multiply 600. So all this is really asking me to do is multiply. I take 0.3, multiply it by 600, I get 180. Okay, so don't let those problems confuse you. I think it's easiest to just go word for word, convert them over, and see what you have. The last thing in this section is multiplying and dividing real numbers. And what they're looking at there is dealing with positives and negatives. I'm not going to deal with two positives. I think you know how to multiply two positive numbers. I think you know how to divide two positive numbers. But let's look at the special cases, and my guess is you already know this too. What if I have one positive, one negative? The good news is the rules are the same. If you're multiplying and you have one positive and one negative, you get a negative. So 5 times negative 2 would be negative 10. The same with dividing. If you have one positive, 15, and one negative, negative 3, you get a negative. And it doesn't matter where the positive is, where the negative is. If you have one positive and one negative, you get a negative. The other possibility is two negatives. And this is a rule people usually remember. Two negatives make a positive. Negative 3 times negative 4 is 12. Or negative 18 divided by negative 9 is 2. Okay, so that's what you need to remember about multiplying and dividing positive and negative numbers.